Hi, tonight we're working on getting the borders on this Miss Kelly project, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to miter the corners to give it a nice finished look. The idea here is to frame it in, and we're going to show you how. And welcome back to the Shamrock Quilt Studio. Hi, welcome back. Tonight I'm going to put the stitching on in the corners of the borders for this Miss Kelly project. And we're going to start first by going in and stitching all the way down to the corner. As you recall, when we worked on this before, we stopped the stitching beforehand so we could make sure that it was on properly, and then we're going to go back now and get those corners sewn on. So I'm going to start with one on each side, and what I'm going to do is put a pin there where the corner is underneath. And we're using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And I've got my machine set on a length of 3. You might want to experiment with your machine to see if that works appropriately for you. And I think I'm going to try to slide this over just a little bit. There. I think I told you before that sometimes when I sew and I'm trying to film, it's not very comfortable. So we'll see if that makes it a little bit better. Okay, here we go. I'm going to take that one side and I'm going to stitch all the way down to the point. And I'm going to go back to lock it in and cut it off. And then I'm going to take the other side. We're going to pull that back and do the same thing on this side. Get a pin right there at the corner so we know where it is. Now this one might be a little bit more difficult because we're going to start in the corner and work out. That's really not my preferred method, but that's what we're going to do. We want to make sure that that is right at that 1/2 inch seam allowance, and we've got it right in the corner. And since this is going to be where it ends, we're going to take a little stitch back to hold us in place, and then stitch up to join our other stitching. And cut it. Okay. So now let's check, but we should have a situation where we have the pieces joined and they are just about at the same spot. They're a little bit off. I think we like 1 stitch short. And this has not been pressed yet, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a couple of smallish pins and just kind of finger press out that seam allowance so that if we were ironing it or pressing it, we would be pressing it to the dark side, as they say. And I don't want to press it yet because I've got this blue disappearing ink on it, and I want to get that off before we press. So we're going to just do this instead. Okay, so now we've got a corner here. And that's the way we want it to look. We just want to join this as an angle. I'm trying to get all the little pieces lined up here. And what happened to my rulers? Well, here's one. Okay, so we're going to line this ruler up, Anyway, so we've got the two pieces down. We've got some pins to hold the seam in place. I think I'm going to add one more, just to be sure. Okay. And we've got these laid out. Now what we should have is we should have pretty much a square here. And I see we're dipping in a little bit on this side. So let's see what's going on. Okay, that looks like it's fixed it. Now we're right on the edges. So what we want to do is we want to create this diagonal line that is a 45 degree. And if we're really lucky, which doesn't happen too often in here, whatever it is I'm looking for, I can never find. This will work. Little white pencil. What we're going to do is we are going to line up the diagonal line of our ruler here on the edge of the fabric, and we're going to mark right here. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure how well this is going to come out. This is a water-soluble marking pencil. I was looking for some chalk, but I don't see it. But we do have it there, and what I'm going to do for the moment is I'm going to stick a couple of pins in there just to kind of keep track of where that line was. And then we're going to do the same thing down here. Did we do that properly? We did that properly. We're going to line up this bottom line against the same fabric. And we're going to take that corner right into the corner. Whoops. And we're going to mark it as well. That one's a little bit darker. And then to go back and check, just because I do like to check where we are and how well we've done, we're going to line it up to the other side of the fabric, lining up that purple edge of the fabric here, lining up the center here, and it looks like that's pretty much on target. Now, that's the right side of the fabric. And what we need to do is transfer these markings to the back side, because we like to sew with our right sides together when we make a miter corner. So we're going to mark here. And then we're going to turn it over and see, there they are. We can see the pins. Okay, so that one's marked. You don't have to have it exact as far as the angle goes so much, but you want to have it exact as to where that line is. Okay, so there it is. Now we're going to take the rest of these out, and we're going to fold this opposite corner to opposite corner. So what you have here on this side is these two purple pieces together. And you see I opened up that seam on the bottom. And here's the point we're joining. It's right there. And we're going to open up this seam. And we're going to stick a pin in it right there at that corner. Okay, so right there. And then we're going to line these up. So the outside edge of those purple fabrics matches because they're all the same size, and we took great care to make sure that we cut them straight. And we've been careful not to stretch them. So now all of those are together. We're going to put some over here as well. And you'll notice that these sides match up also. So now there's our line. You can see where those pins are. And what we're going to do, I seem to be woefully lacking in pins in here, is we're going to put a pin here. You can see how that line is lining up right there to that point. And we're going to do the same thing here. So we take that one out, take that one out. And if you look on the back side here, I think what we'll find is that we are on the money. We've got all our pins out the back. We've got the pins on the front. We know where we want to stop our sewing. And then just to be sure, we're going to do the same thing again. And I need to get that up just a little bit. Now, it looks to me like that our mark, our original mark, may not have been in the right place. And I'm going to use a pencil. And this is kind of odd because I told you just the other day that I wasn't going to use a pencil anymore, but that was for marking quilting. We're marking here on the wrong side of the fabric, so even if we get it wrong, you won't know it. Okay, so now we've got a mark here in addition to our pins. And I'm going to take the pins and put them across the seam. So we have a line to sew down. We know where we're stopping on each end. So we're going to sew it now. And if we're lucky, it'll all come out and it'll be good. If it's not, we're just going to adjust it as we need to and sew again. I'm not sure you're going to be able to see exactly what I'm sewing here, but we're going to go for it and see what happens. Needle down on the line. And I'll tell you one thing I am going to do. I am going to use a little bit of fabric here on the back side of this. So we're not stitching off the fabric, we're stitching from one fabric to another. So when I do the back stitch at the very beginning, it has some place to put that stitch if it needs to. You don't want to pull your fabric during this portion because you are sewing a bias. We're sewing at the diagonal. Okay, and there we are. It got right to the pin and it kind of bumped up against it. And we're going to take a stitch back, just one, and then we're going to cut it. Couple of things. The reason why we don't want to sew off the edge of the fabric is if you've ever experienced what they call a bird's nest in your machine, you may give up sewing entirely. As a matter of fact, that's my daughter's situation. She hates the sewing machine because every time she sews, she gets a bird's nest. The fabric goes down into the guts of the machine. The thread gets all wound up like a big ball of Christmas lights in a tangle. And you have to yank it out of the machine or softly nudge it out while cutting, and then you have to clean up your machine. It's a real mess and it's very discouraging. So that's why we do that. And that little bit of fabric, now it did catch this with it. Whoops, I've got a pin in the scissors. Isn't that weird? We're going to trim this, and I'm just going to let a little chunk of that white fabric stay with it because you won't ever be able to tell. If this is the first time you're doing a mitered corner, you may want to make your stitches longer as kind of a basting stitch so you can get a feel for how it works, because a lot of times anything we do, the first time we do it doesn't go well. So that's just a little pointer there. Okay, so I think we've got it here. There's a little tiny thread stuck in there. Let's see if there, and get that out. And you're going to see down in here some little blue marks from the marking we put on. And we haven't trimmed it yet. Let me slide this out of the way. And look at there. There it is. You have to excuse me. I keep looking up because there's a monitor here and I want to make sure that you can see it appropriately. But there's our mitered corner. And as always, you always want to go back and check and line up your diagonal line on that stitch line. And then look at your fabric. And by golly, we've got it. It looks a little bit on this side. It could be just that it needs to be ironed because it's folded under way up here. Actually, I think what would help is if we came in just a tad more, maybe halfway up, and gave it just a little bit more of an angle. But that's the way you do that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this back on the machine and make that stitch, make that seam just a little bit thicker right towards the end. Maybe a 1/16 of an inch, and we really aren't talking that much. This is what I would consider a fine adjustment. But if you'd like, stick around just a second and you can see with me how that's going to work. Yeah, it is an 1/8 of an inch or less at the very end. Okay, and we've got it back now to the edge of the fabric, and we're going to turn it so we can sew, and we're going to sew right into the point, but it's going to be just like the littlest sliver of a birthday cake is what we're going to get. And then we're about a ½ inch away from the center where that dot is, and I have joined up with the other line of stitches. And since we're not taking it out, we don't need to knot it where we stopped. I just had it kind of go back a stitch or two. And now when we look at it, purple fabric lining up,